Lovely.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening and a very warm welcome to the third of our Teaching for Neurodiversity Train the Trainer webinars. These webinars are funded by the Department for Education as part of a Dyslexia SPLD support project. My name is Alison Keeley and I'm a Regional Manager with Dyslexia Action, one of the charities involved in delivering the Teaching for Neurodiversity project. We hope that you've already accessed parts 1 and 2 of the training, either by attending the webinars or by listening to the recordings. If you haven't already done so, the projects are available on the Dyslexia Action website on our projects page. For everyone attending tonight's live event, you'll receive an email at the end of tonight's session giving a link to the recordings and all the relevant materials. Tonight's session is called Classroom Support Strategies. As with parts 1 and 2, the materials you see in the webinar have been developed by a consortium of leading charities, including the British Dyslexia Association, Dyslexia Action, Dyscalculia Foundation, Helen Arkell and Patos, with additional input from Steve Chin, Fintan O'Regan, ICANN and Ambitious About Autism. To support you while you're listening to the webinar, it's a good idea to have the PowerPoint to hand so that you can refer to it and make notes. The PowerPoint can be accessed in the handout section of the webinar. And in that handout, in the PowerPoint, there's also all the notes that go with each slide. Just as during the previous webinars, we'll be taking questions at the end of the presentation. Remember, you can post a question at any time using the facility on your screen. We'll select the most representative questions to discuss at the end. And if we don't get around to answering your query during the session, we'll try to include it in the list of questions we post on the British Dyslexia Association and the project partners website after the event. So now I'm delighted to be able to introduce Sarah Meredith of Dyslexia Action, who is going to deliver tonight's webinar for us.
Thank you very much, Alison. So welcome to our third session in this series of post-16 presentations. Our first session was focusing on the Seeing the Whole Picture, and this gave an introduction to the project and an overview of the importance of identifying need in the classroom. The second session discussed neurodiversity and the benefits of identifying overlapping difficulties through the use of a checklist. And then tonight's session, the third and final session, is to show a selection of strategies to help guide teachers in the classroom. So, first of all, I think tips for cascading. When you are delivering this to your colleagues, ask them to select just 2 or 3 of the ideas included in the section we're going to show you this evening, just to trial in their classrooms, and ask them to monitor any successes, perhaps using the assess, plan, do, review cycle, and then to share ideas in staff meetings and possibly through learning walks as well. Now, the examples in this section are really just good practice, and what is effective in teaching learners with SPLD is also effective in teaching all learners. We know that many staff will already be implementing many of these techniques. We hope that this section will reassure them that they are doing the right thing and explain support SPLD learners. We also hope that it offers some tried and tested techniques which are new to you but which you will be keen to take back to your settings. We will be stressing in this section that not all methods will work for all individuals in all situations. It tends to be a process of trial and error, I'm afraid, to find that right strategy for the right situation. But there is something out there for everyone. So before we go on to look at any support strategies, it is worth considering this paragraph from the Code of Practice. We know that for post-16, the Code of Practice assumes that students with SEND will be identified in primary or secondary school. However, we know that for many neurodivergent students, this is not the case. And there is a likelihood that students will have passed through the education system without being provided with the relevant support. As the Code of Practice, the purpose of identification is to work out what action the school needs to take, not to fit a learner into a category. In the previous sections we've been building a picture of our learners, and in the last section we used a checklist to find out more about them. It is important to say again that this process doesn't aim to label for the sake of labelling. Rather, it aims to increase our understanding of learners' strengths and needs so that appropriate interventions can be put in place. We hope that using the checklist will help teachers in the classroom to look at these learners with fresh eyes. Instead of trying to label, look at these areas of difficulty that overlap. It is essential to put provision in place as soon as possible. Whether a learner is labelled or not, it's always critical to put support in place as soon as a need is identified, rather than waiting for further assessment. From a motivational perspective, it's important to provide the support so that the learner experiences success and improvement as soon as possible. Some interventions may require some preparation, for example with differentiated worksheets, and be implemented straight away and are likely to help all the learners in the class. It is these easy to implement, effective classroom support strategies which are the focus of this section of the training. We're not turning people into specialists, but introducing them to a catalogue of ideas from which you can pick and choose whatever is most relevant. These strategies are the interim between wondering why a learner is not progressing and seeking advice from a specialist. These are strategies that you will be suggesting to your colleagues to take back to their classrooms to help support them in implementing the code of practice. And a final thought, the SEND code of practice makes that settings are expected to identify and support students with SEN at as early a stage as possible. Research has shown that intervention at age 4 and 5 is more effective than intervention at 6 and older, so the sooner the better. It is vital that settings are seen to be following the SEND code of practice and other legislation, and putting these practical tools and strategies into place and making them standard practice is a good way forward. Not only is it a requirement that reasonable adjustments are made, it will be a valuable asset from Ofsted's perspective. So let's start with self-esteem. Students entering a post-16 setting may have a negative view of themselves and may have disengaged from an educational setting they have found incredibly challenging, particularly if their learning difference has not been identified or the level of support they've received in primary school was not continued in their secondary setting, which I hear a lot that they do get some relatively good element of support at primary, but then going into secondary, suddenly that does seem to disappear, unfortunately. So how are we going to help with their self-esteem? Well, look for the learner's strengths and help them to recognise and value them as well. So group work can be a good way of helping with this. Partner learners with others who have different types of strengths so that each can bring their own talents to the situation. Always emphasise the positive, what the learner can do, and praise small achievements, make praise specific and descriptive. And also be careful not to praise poor work. Actually at this age, post-16, they know when they're being patronised, so just be careful with that. Give praise and advice in a one-to-one setting, or in a quiet or private area. Many learners don't want to be singled out or to be praised in front of an audience, especially again at post-16, they get very sort of embarrassed. And think about reflective listening. So check the learner's input and ideas by asking questions, their understanding. So, a lot of these things I've just said, they're things that you probably do already, but they are really good things to try, and you may have others as well. So understanding behaviour and frustrated or angry or just simply quirky behaviour is common amongst those with specific learning difficulties, and for many of these learners the classroom can be quite a sensory overload room, especially noise. That can be a particular problem. We need to understand the triggers. So what is it that will make a learner anxious? And this can vary from one learner to another. And the source of anxiety may be something that's very easily remedied. A learner worrying about not being able to cope with their homework, or copying their homework from the board even. You know, that can be a stressful thing for some students. And remember too that anxiety can take different forms, and with some it's quite obvious, resulting in the learner acting out with very poor behaviour, and with others it may be hidden and they simply shy away, preferring not to be noticed. And both extremes really do need to be acknowledged. So how are we going to help with understanding behaviour? Well, it's important to create an atmosphere of trust in which learners know that they can ask for help when needed. So, if they do ask for help, more than once, twice, 3 times in the lesson, don't come across as exasperated or impatient. And you could prepare learners for what's likely to be coming up next, perhaps with visual reminders or prompts wherever possible. Sometimes, a timeout does help, a couple of minutes just outside of the classroom, just for them to calm down, just because they might be anxious about what they're about to do. And again, just to go out of the classroom or just time out just to collect their thoughts, take a few deep breaths. Consider referring the student for counselling within the college. Many students with SPLD know that you are aware will benefit from the opportunity to attend counselling sessions. So do bear that in mind as a possibility. Motivation, yes, certainly at post-16 this can be an issue. It's a vital factor for learning, and if self-esteem is low, motivation is going to be affected. So think about the goals. They need to be simple, they need to be straightforward, and it needs to be located where a learner can access them easily. Learners need to be reminded of their goals. What are they doing? These goals have to be achievable. So it's no good expecting the learner to achieve more than they're capable of. They need to know that they are capable of it. So differentiation is the key there. So it's very important to use SMART targets. Ownership, that's very important as far as motivation is concerned. Allow the learner to have some input into their goal setting, and that gets them on board and in control of their own learning. And let them set their own targets that are totally achievable. Success really will breed success. Metacognition. Now, what is metacognition? This can be defined as sort of knowing about knowing, or knowing how I learn. And it can encourage active learning and keep those learners engaged. Asking students how they learn and what works for them can really help to build their self-esteem and their motivation. So to ask your students to think of something that they did learn successfully, and that can be either something factual or even something like just learning to ride a bike. Just ask them, well, how did they learn that? What worked for them? Can they apply those same learning techniques to other situations? Encourage learners to think about how they learn best and identify their own strengths and weaknesses. And multisensory teaching is one powerful tool to help with this process, and we will be going on to look at this in a moment. The model the internal dialogue. What am I doing this for? Have I done anything like this before? How can I help myself remember this? So what techniques and strategies do I know that could help with this task? And for example, would a mind map be a good tool to use? And I also encourage teaching on. If they can actually teach that particular bit of information themselves, they're more likely to understand it. And peer support, we know that students can learn from their peers. You may have methods for gathering information about how students learn in your settings already. So yeah, it's good for them to be aware of how they learn best. So, using multisensory techniques, and the benefits of multisensory teaching have been recognised for a long time. They're beneficial for all of us, not just for those with a specific learning difficulty. They benefit all of us because they will play to our strengths. But they do have to be particularly appropriate to the learners with a specific learning difficulty. So you have to use a range of different multisensory techniques that can provide opportunities for overlearning, whilst also encouraging the learners to improve their metacognition through discussing what techniques work best for them. So try to employ a combination of visual, auditory, kinesthetic channels, and employ as many of the 5 senses as possible to make the material being learned more memorable. So rather than simply talking, use as many visual aids and gestures, memory hooks and activities as much as possible. This will help all learners retain what is being delivered to them much better. And usually the more inventive and wacky the better. They will remember it much better if it's a little bit different. Waggle, what a good one looks like. So never underestimate the power of modelling. Many students just can't see what's being required of them. Don't assume that they will get it from your words alone. So give them examples, showing them how to do something. And you could, think about the Great British Bake Off or MasterChef as an example. Think about how much more difficult it is for the contestants to know how to cook and present something in a technical challenge when they've no knowledge of what the end product should look like. So giving them an example and a model from work from is really, really helpful for these students. Visualization can be a very powerful strategy for turning auditory input into a visual memory. Although it should be noted that not all learners can visualize, so do be aware of that as well. But for those who can, you need to show them how powerful it can be by teaching it as a method. And one method is to possibly read a piece of descriptive text and ask questions about the detail. And then tell the learners that this time you'd like them to listen and to make a movie in their head. And then ask the questions again. And the detailed information recalled actually amazes the learners when asked how did they do it, because they say they could actually see it because they've made that movie in their head. Auditory support skills, so teaching students to note-take effectively by using abbreviations and symbols and mind maps and doodles to assist their memory. And essentially this is a way of turning auditory input into a visual reminder. Encourage learners to use their own voice to support memory. Our own individual voice is the most memorable. So using strategies such as discussion and teaching on, recording and listening back, or proofreading out loud. And a smartphone is a really useful tool for recording information in the student's own voice. Kinesthetic support skills, so try to include movement whenever you can. This can be a powerful influence on the memory. For example, arm signals or hand shapes matching with things that need to be remembered. Remember that with all of these strategies I've talked about, the learners will need sort of explicit instruction, to be shown and shown examples of how they can do this. Giving one instruction at a time. Now, this is particularly beneficial for those with short attention spans, but it's also helpful for those who can't cope with a lot of verbal overload and those who have a limited memory shelf. So just saying a little at a time and as little as possible is much more powerful. So give instructions in a very short and clear way, which requires one activity at a time. Ask specific questions to ensure instructions have been understood. Don't just say, do you understand? Be specific. Be prepared to repeat yourself. So students will have been attempting to listen, but when they reach their the limit of that working memory, they will need information repeated. So yeah, don't get exasperated that you do have to repeat yourself quite a lot for these students. Keep instructions in the order of the activity. Instructions delivered out of order are very difficult for students with sequencing issues, so do be aware of that. Making text reader friendly. Now, research has shown that 15 to 20% of people suffer from visual stress to some extent, and this is where learners report text moving around or goes blurry or fuzzy, or the black print on the white background can dazzle the eyes and can cause headaches. Now this is diagnosed by an optometrist, and it's linked to visual perceptual difficulties, so it is a cognitive type of issue. You can have 20/20 vision, but the text can be very uncomfortable to look at. So, bear this in mind, that young people often don't know that what they see is different for others. So it is just worth asking them about the text they're looking at. Do the words move around? What is happening when you read? Are you getting headaches? Never underestimate how long it can take for some students to process visual material. And symptoms of visual stress can include sort of the tracking, so skipping lines or rereading the same lines, incorrectly reading those small high-frequency words like if, is, in, adding or omitting high-frequency words like and the, making errors within words or at the ends of words, which can affect understanding, of course. Confusing words that look alike, so reading split for spilt or the for there. Confusing letters, B's and D's and P's and Q's, and G's, M's and N's and M's and W's. And also confusing numbers like 9s and 6s or 2s and 5s, or 91 could be confused for 19. So being aware of those, those are very big indicators of visual stress. So how can we make text reader friendly? Make the font larger. This can reduce the likelihood of errors being made. Ideally the font size should be 12 to 14. The ability to increase text size electronically is a strong argument for making materials available electronically. Learners with visual processing difficulties would really benefit from seeing this information electronically. There is much controversy about the type of font for learners with visual difficulties. Sans serif fonts are shown to be quite accessible. That's like the type that's being shown on these slides now. Again, some trial and error may be required. Everyone is different. Another one to try is that the dyslexia font. This can be easily found on the internet, but again, opinions on it can vary. Try to avoid block capitals or underlining and italics. They can be trickier to read and identify. Use bold for emphasis where necessary. Don't use the fully justified version, like the newspaper columns. The space between the letters and words varies in order to keep the right side of the column straight, and that can be quite tricky to read. So try to left justify passages of text where possible. And some learners are really adversely affected by the use of bright white paper. It can really upset the way they see things. So using a softer colour can really help. Use cream or pastel paper, and even try changing the colour of the text to blue or grey or to 85% black text. But again, it is down to preference, so you have to trial and error these different colours and styles. Try different things with different learners. Have a supply of different coloured overlays in every classroom so that everyone can try them out. Encourage learners to experiment with the different colours. Just empower them by allowing them to choose what works best for them, because it really won't just be the dyslexic learners who prefer to work with colour. Line spacing, 1.5 line spacing is best really. It does make the text easier to process. And large blocks of dense print can be intimidating. Try cutting longer texts into paragraphs or present information in shorter bullet points. And apply these standards to your use of the whiteboard and computer screens as well. So set a different colour background where you can, and check the colour and size and spacing of the font, because all this will really help. Allow think time. Slow processing speeds are a common feature of SPLD. Never underestimate how long it can take some students to process verbal material, either written or spoken. And following previous training projects, we've had a lot of positive feedback from teachers who've put these strategies into practice. Many were quite amazed at how effective just simple adaptations can be. One feedback from last year's project was, when a teacher gives me time to think, I have more time to know the answer. So slow down your rate of speaking. You may need to practice perfecting this skill. Yeah, just be that little bit slower. And in fact, the students' responses may be longer, and they may actually say more back. Allow students time to process what you say. Allow that think time, and anything between 3 and 10 seconds, really. When you've asked them something, and they don't respond straight away, just give them that bit of extra time to process the question, and also a little bit of extra time to formulate their answer. So it's all going to take that bit of extra time. So, what seems a long time to you, where you might suddenly think, oh, I'm going to ask somebody else, just stop and think and give them that extra time. Don't talk when students are writing. This can be very distracting, and they will tend to lose their train of thought and have to begin all over again. So any learner that has a weak working memory needs to have as much free headspace as possible to perform. Reducing memory overload. So you may need to explain to your colleagues the different kinds of memory we have. We have short-term memory, which is very short. I mean, the information that goes in lasts seconds, and unless you do something with that information. Someone with an average short-term memory may be able to have 7 or 8 items on their memory shelf at one time. Somebody with a limited short-term memory will only have space for 3 or 4 items, and as soon as that number is exceeded, then the shelf will collapse and everything is lost. So long-term memory is the storage of any information that can be drawn upon easily, quickly and efficiently. And in order to get short-term memory into the long-term memory, you're using your working memory. And this is where the information comes into your short-term memory and you start doing something with that information. You start working on it, you start doing something with it, rehearsing it, manipulating that information in order to get it into the long-term memory. So effective use of working memory allows that information to be filed efficiently. And it's just that case of rehearsing. An effective way to demonstrate the difference between short-term memory and working memory is by using the digits forwards and digits reversed activity. So if you give them a string of digits that they have to repeat back to you the way you've said it, that's checking their short-term memory. If you give them a string of digits and ask them to repeat back in reverse order, that's using their working memory, and that is usually quite difficult for students who have learning difficulties. If you want to put more pressure on your colleagues when demonstrating this, you could try delivering the digits in another language, because that adds an extra layer of difficulty. So weak short-term memory and working memory skills are very common to learners with SPLD, and it can have a severe impact on their ability to take information in. So think about breaking down any task into manageable chunks. Signal words can be very effective at alerting learners to what is required of them. So for example, there's 3 things you need to remember, and count these off on your fingers. I encourage your learners to do the same as well at the same time. Check understanding. If the learner hasn't got what is required of them in class, they're not going to be able to get on with the work. So, and many of them may be too shy or embarrassed to admit or to ask for help. So, you know, just check they've understood, and also consider using study buddies, and provide written information or instructions in numbered bullet points. And all these small changes, which a lot of you may already be using, can be extremely effective. Teaching organisational skills. Now, organisation is an area of difficulty, and that occurs across all specific learning difficulties, and it's not something that is really taught. It just seems to be expected that learners will suddenly develop good organisational skills, and, you know, taking notes and all these sort of skills that are important as you progress into, you know, sort of further education and beyond. So use pictures and diagrams or photos to help with organisation. Demonstrate how planners and filing systems can be used. They may need to be told specifically what kind of stationery and files and dividers they may need to use and how to use them. Use colour coding for different subjects. Many apparent organisational problems may stem simply from the fact that the learner didn't get the information down, especially if it's required from copying from the board. So here technology is invaluable, taking pictures, becoming the norm, you know, using their mobile phones for that. And employ any other IT shortcuts as well to support organisation, you know, any recording devices, dictaphones, or any devices or apps on their phones. For students who face challenges with timekeeping, encourage them to set alarms on their phone that can be labelled with relevant location or activity. So lots of ideas there, and again I'm sure you have others. Supporting fine motor skills, and, you know, difficulties with fine motor skills are common to many specific learning difficulties, and they may persist into adult years and can be particularly problematic for students following vocational courses which require manipulation of tools or machinery like sort of hairdressing or mechanics or woodworking. So it's important to explore these challenges when a student is choosing a course. So things to think about is maybe secure equipment to surfaces or use non-slip matting, explore alternative equipment or adaptations to equipment, position away from busy thoroughfares, ensure chairs are supportive and at the correct height, use templates where possible, allow students to take equipment home for practice if that is possible, and of course allowing extra time. Using assistive technology, and there's a wealth of assistive technology available, much of which has been actually developed by designers who are themselves have specific learning difficulties. The range of tools is increasing all the time. A simple smartphone has many features that can be used to support SPLD learners, such as alarms and diary apps, the ability to increase and decrease the size of font, and speech-to-text technology. There's so much out there, and as I say, that's increasing all the time. So, you know, familiarise yourself with what's out there. Like I say, there is a lot out there. You could check out Tech Thursday from Dyslexia Action, and that's where sort of new technology is introduced, and technologies such as e-readers are compared. Encourage the use of laptops and tablets, and you could teach touch typing. Consider the use of speech-to-text software such as Dragon or Read and Write Text Help. Load to Learn has a huge range of educational textbooks available, and that's for free in digital format. Again, that's on the Dyslexia Action website. If you go there, Load to Learn. And remember that as with all methods, what works for one learner may not work for another. So encourage students to be creative and to work in a way which is in line with their strengths. with reading and proofreading techniques. A student with SPLD are likely to find reading text challenging. In order for SPLD students to be successful in post-16 settings, they will need to read and comprehend information and create written work which meets the required criteria. So they need to have strategies which they can use independently and which they can understand how to apply in a range of situations. So encourage students to read small chunks at a time, highlight important keywords, provide digital copies or photocopies which offer the opportunity for important points to be highlighted and for students to add their own notes, and demonstrate to students how to make separate notes when reading, provide relevant word lists, teach proofreading techniques, sort of reading back from the end of the work first to check spellings, read out loud to check the meaning, and also wherever possible perhaps ask someone else to read through the work and to read it aloud to you so that you can just hear any errors. Assistive technology such as speech-to-text and text-to-speech can be extremely useful. Students will need to be taught how to use this technology for it to be fully and successfully utilised. As with all other suggestions, not all strategies are going to work for all, but many of these strategies will be useful for both those with SPLD and those without. So again, it's just trial and error. Teaching study skills and assessment techniques. Students will benefit from being taught specific study skills because this increases their confidence when producing work and in exams. So, for example, where referencing schemes are needed, perhaps you could make a bookmark that shows the style of referencing required by the particular educational establishment. Use rhyming phrases to aid memory, for example, commas, if in doubt, leave it out, and encourage students to make up their own rhymes and acronyms. That's often much more memorable. Provide templates for essay writing, so tips and suggestions can be added to templates. For example, write the title and keep that in front of you all the time. This is what the essay will be focused on so that they don't sort of drift off and go off on a tangent. Introduce the use of colour coding when organising notes for essays. Teach the use of both digital and non-digital mind mapping. That's very useful technique to develop. Again, not everybody gets on with it, but for those who do, it's very helpful. Support students with revision techniques and the opportunities to practice exam papers in advance. And grouping activities where information can be physically moved around. So, for example, using post-it notes, and this can help students to sort out their ideas into sections. They can physically move those post-it notes around. And when examinations involve complex questions where there's sort of several parts to that question, ensure students are aware of this and demonstrate to them how they can break the question down into its parts by adding numbers to the different parts of the question. This helps students to ensure that they respond to all of the parts of the question. Again, these are useful for learners with and without specific learning difficulties. Students with specific learning difficulties are often eligible for reasonable adjustments made to the exam in line with their learning difference. So, for example, extra time or a computer reader or scribe or a separate room. So the JCQ are responsible for exam access arrangements. That's the Joint Council for Qualifications. And the rules surrounding exam access arrangements are revised on a yearly basis. So settings do need to ensure they are complying with the most up-to-date regulations. So do check every year, sort of September time. Teaching staff and support staff play a vital role in ensuring the right kind of support is identified and the learner knows how to make best use of these arrangements. For students to be eligible for exam access arrangements, the educational setting needs to provide evidence of the student's normal way of working and must reflect the support already given to them. So early identification of these individuals is essential. And students must have appropriate opportunities to use the access arrangements before the exam. So, use it in the classroom, in internal tests and exams, and in mock exams. Now, we do know that not all educational settings apply for exam access arrangements for their students. We feel that we should also highlight that access arrangements are for students of all abilities. In some cases it will mean the difference for a student between an A and an A star, and in other cases it may mean the difference between a U and an E. Now, testing for exam access arrangements needs to involve a practitioner with a minimum of a level 7 qualification, which includes at least 100 hours of relating to individual specialist assessment. Or a qualified psychologist registered with the HCPC, or a specialist assessor with an assessor's practicing certificate. Professional associations and support centres can be sources of specialist assessors and provide training for access arrangements assessors. If you need help or advice about identifying which students may be eligible for access arrangements, or you would like a qualified practitioner to visit your setting and carry out the assessments for you at your school or college, you can find information and support at any of the participating organisation websites, including ourselves at Dyslexia Action. So, yeah, very important to be aware of what's there, and the tutors to be aware that it should be their normal way of working. Now, having high expectations, it may be worth referring to the SEND Code of Practice, section 6.12. The National Curriculum Inclusion Statement states that teachers should set high expectations for every student, whatever their prior attainment. And teachers have been known to lower their expectations for students identified with SPLD. And also in the case of higher achieving learners with SPLD, teachers may assume that they are already achieving well and don't require additional support. But, it may be the case that provision of well-targeted support could move these students from above average to well above average. Identifying an SPLD should never cause us to lower our ambitions for that student. It's essential that teachers have high expectations for all, and that learners' strengths are identified and taken into account as much as their weaknesses. So use observation and interviews with the student and their family, using the checklists that we explored in the previous session, and assessments to build as complete and accurate a profile as possible of that learner. And then use this to set appropriate targets, which makes the most of the learner's strengths and provide support for their weaknesses. All learners are individuals. It's impossible to predict which subjects or skills they'll do well in, but with the right support and encouragement, a student may go on to excel in a subject that we may never have predicted. They may surprise us. So we return to Phoenix, and we'll briefly just go through her challenges. She had challenges with numeracy, and she met with her one-to-one tutor. The support tests were carried out, and through the checklist and through the interviews that she had, she now receives one-to-one support for her numeracy, which has given strategies to help herself when she's working independently. She's also being considered for exam access arrangements, which is helping to reduce her anxiety around maths. Working memory was an issue for Phoenix. She's been encouraged to use her smartphone to take photographs and to use voice recordings to help. And her tutors give her instructions in smaller chunks of information. And she's also been shown how to use a memory palace, which if you attended my last session. It's helping to remember sequential information, where you imagine a place that you know well, a room in your house, and use items in that room to link to items you want to remember. Now, Phoenix had strengths. We must remember her strengths. She had strong motor skills. She was identified as being particularly adept at the finer, physically tricky elements of hairdressing, and so she's been encouraged to demonstrate her skills to the rest of her tuition group, which has helped to improve her confidence. She has a lot of energy, and she's in the football team, so that's been highlighted as a great strength which she can draw upon for her learning. She's very creative. So during one-to-one sessions, she's been shown how to use this creative strength to support with her working memory, sort of visualizing and using those sorts of techniques. So how will you support your student? What strategies are you going to use that we've discussed in this part of the training are going to be most appropriate? How would you implement them? You know, again, you've probably got a lot of your own strategies that you use, which you can employ yourselves. So, what have we covered? In the first part of the training, like I said, we were looking at the whole picture, recognising strengths as well as challenges. In part 2, we looked at the SPLD checklist to help inform our observations of the students' needs. And in this part, we've been looking at the classroom support strategies to meet the needs of all our students. During the course of these different sections, we've been adding an increasing amount of information to our student profile. So we've got the initial observations, strengths and weaknesses, more detailed observations from the checklist, and then a list of appropriate strategies to trial in the classroom. In the training materials, you will find an example of completed student profile, which is your waggle, what a good one looks like. If you don't already have a student profile template in your setting, you can use this as a starting point. So the next step, it's important to reiterate that this training should be regarded as a first step towards cultural change within the setting. It will only have an impact if it's followed up in a strategic way. The learning support team will need to reflect on current policy and practice and put in place a plan for change which operates across the whole school. So a few suggestions: adopt a whole setting approach to neurodiversity. Make this a part of the setting policy. Recognise and celebrate diversity throughout the setting, staff as well as students. Raise students' awareness of learning differences and strengths. Ensure that everyone has access to training and information. So the key take-home message here is that this training aims to challenge the notion of special education needs as mysteriously other, and to build an understanding of learning diversity where categories and labels can get in the way of seeing each student as an individual with diverse strengths and needs. So our mainstream colleagues are the key players in developing inclusive practice. They need to be made to feel empowered and to understand that a lot of their day-to-day practice may already be neurodiversity friendly, even if they didn't even realise this. So that is part 3 of this session. If there are any questions and questions that you'd like me to answer, or to Alison to interject if she feels she's got something interesting to share, please fire away.
Hi Sarah, we haven't got any questions that have come in at the moment. There's been a few coming in whilst you've been speaking, which Nicola and I have been answering. The We had a question from Anna who was asking about note-taking in lecture-based sessions. So I was talking about assistive technology. Have you got any suggestions for her for physical note-taking for a student who is perhaps, as we know, some settings are not keen on having their lectures recorded? Are there alternatives for those students if that's not an option for them?
Well, like I mentioned, sort of developing strategies for, abbreviating, for just writing those keywords, using your own special symbols that make sense to you. There is an excellent piece of technology. It's a smart pen. It's called an Echo pen, which you could look up. It's not cheap, unfortunately, but I do know a lot of students do use this successfully. Basically, what it is, it's a pen that you use with special paper as well. So you can use it to record what's being said, but you make notes as well with the pen. So you'll scribble away, making as many notes as you can as possible, preferably the keywords, but just filling in where you can. But then afterwards, after that lecture, you can replay on the pen what has been said, so that you don't miss a single thing. And instead of having to go through the whole lecture again, if you put the nib of the pen on any particular part of the notes that you've been taking, it will start replaying from that point. So, it saves you having to go through the whole thing again. Everything that you have then written down can be transferred onto the computer, even any diagrams that you've made, that can be transferred onto the screen. And if you upgraded the pen with a special bit of software, that handwriting can be changed into typed writing, typed text. So that is a very useful piece of equipment that I know a lot of students use in lectures. A lot of people use it in meetings. It's very, very useful piece of equipment. But like I say, if the lecturers don't like sort of lessons being recorded, it is a case of developing those techniques of shortening what you're writing and using symbols and pictures where possible.
Thank you very much for that, Sarah. We've also had a question about mind mapping tools. Have you got any that you are sort of your favourites to use, or are there any you're aware of that have been really useful with students? Or is it a question of sort of trying different ones out and finding the one that works for that individual?
It is trial and error. I mean, there are specialist mind mapping software out there like Inspiration, and there's another one that off the top of my head I can't think of the name. But there is also in Read and Write Gold Text Help, which has text to speech, speech to text, and an inbuilt dictionary and a picture dictionary and facility to change the background colour of the screen. That software also includes a mind mapping facility as well. So that piece of software actually does a lot of things. So it's a lot for the price of one. So if the setting can introduce that and get the license for that for all students and staff as well, that's a good step forward, because like I say, it does include a lot of different facilities within one package.
And we've had some recommendations come through from some of our listeners. So Michelle has recommended MindView, that she said is software that's for mind mapping that's often funded by DSA. And Rachel has suggested MindGenius as something that's used by her students. And
that was the one I'd gone off the top of my head. Yes.
Yeah, MindGenius, I think there's a free version of the app for, as there is with Inspiration as well. I think there's a free version of the app for that as well. So they're good to sort of try out, and then when you find the one that's going to really work for you, you can purchase that one and have the full flexibility of the software. And Angela has also said you can investigate the free applications in My Study Bar as well. So that sounds really good too. Right, I think, Sarah, we've oh, hang on. We've had Chris in South Wales is saying to us that with his dyslexic students, he finds that memory is often the weakest area of a student's learning profile. Do you have any suggestions for students who are perhaps in their early 20s and for whom the exercises for younger students may not be available, may not be appropriate?
I guess that Chris is talking about, you know, that working memory again, and there are strategies. You know, it is a case of, you know, being given information in smaller chunks. You know, it's those usual things that I've already mentioned. I don't know if Alison, you have anything extra to add. You know, it is a case of trial and error. You know, and it's unfortunate that students, you know, in their 20s, you know, that the kind of work they're doing probably does involve a lot more information that they have to digest. So, you know, I think recording, repetition, you know, I can't really think of anything else right
Is Memory Palace something that would be suitable for the
Memory
students
Palace.
at age?
Yes, that could be a useful thing, which, like I say, that is very successful actually, especially if you've got a lot to learn for an exam, because you can literally just pick things out from the image of your room, and, you know, okay, the mirror is going to be that bit of information, and the picture on the wall is going to be that bit of information, and the lamp is going to be that bit of information, and you can hold a lot of information onto that one item. So by the time you've gone all the way around the room, you are able to hold so much more information in your head.
So we've had Marianne, who suggested flashcards. Chris has come back to us, and he's thanks for the suggestions. He's also found bullet journals to be very useful. Rachel's saying that spider diagrams often help, so similar to a mind map. And then we've got one last question. So any suggestions to help avoid plagiarism with older students? Oh, I don't think that's a neurodiversity issue, but I'm sure
not really, no. But I have to say that I think most settings now do. There is some sort of app thing, isn't there, that can be employed to avoid that. I don't know a lot about it, but I know that, you know, that most education establishments, FE and HE, they do have their own ways of identifying if that is happening, and which, you know, is to the detriment of some of our students who may find copying and pasting, you know, a helpful way of writing their assignments. But yeah, unfortunately, you know, they have to find other strategies.
I think also if students are supported with assistive technology, then they don't need to, then they will be, if they're using speech to text, they'll be able to dictate what they are thinking, and it won't be plagiarism. They'll have understood that if they've been able to access the information in a way that works for them, they will have that information and be able to reproduce it in an essay in a way that they understand. So I think that's good. Michelle is saying Quizlet is good for memory, and we've also been sent a few links about how to identify plagiarism, so that's very helpful. Thank you to those people. And Rachel's also said stressing students about helping them to learn, so that metacognition as well. So I think we're at the end of our webinar this evening. Sarah, thank you so much for taking us through all of that. I know there's an awful lot in tonight's webinar. Thank you to everyone who's attended as well. You've got both mine and Sarah's email addresses on the screen, so if any of you want to get in contact with us after the webinar, we'd be more than happy for you to do so. So thank you again for attending this evening. We hope you've enjoyed the series of webinars. We do have 3 final face-to-face sessions taking place in London, one for primary, one for secondary, one for post-16, which will be taking, if you go to Dyslexia Action in the projects page, you'll be able to see a link on there to Eventbrite. The events are free to attend, and lunch is provided. I haven't got all of the dates in the head. I know the secondary one is on the 18th of February, but if you want the information about those, Dyslexia Action projects page is the place to go. Thank you all very much for attending, and please get in contact if you'd like to have any more information. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.